What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. Hope you all had a great weekend. Of course, the NFL Scouting Combine came to a close, and a lot of storylines came out of Indianapolis. The New York Giants, of course, as we discussed throughout the last several weeks, were deep in negotiations, trying to get a deal done to trade for Matthew Stafford. But ultimately, in the end, Stafford decided to stay with the Los Angeles Rams, and now the New York Giants have to pivot in a new direction. And we've heard a lot of different buzz. The Giants like this guy, the Giants like that guy, the Giants might make this trade. Well, right now, the real hot topic of conversation is the Giants' reported interest in quarterback Aaron Rodgers, formerly of the Green Bay Packers, then of the New York Jets, and now next stop could still be in New York, this time with the Giants. And there's also the possibility that wherever Rodgers goes, he brings former two-time All-Pro wide receiver Davante Adams with him. So in today's episode, we want to discuss the possibility of the Giants not only bringing in Rodgers, but also bringing in Davante Adams. What our expectations for the Giants would be if they get that done, and how many games we think they could possibly win with an offense that features Rodgers, Neighbors, Adams, and Tyrone Tracy. Honestly, on paper, it's not the worst, not the best, but there's definitely a lot to discuss with this potential outcome that we could see come to fruition for the New York Giants. So that's what we're going to go ahead and discuss in today's episode. But before we do, Alex, how are you doing today, my friend? And what is your initial reaction to the rumors that the Giants and Rodgers have at least started to have some sort of conversation here, and there could be a mutual interest in bringing him over to the New York Giants?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good, man. Good weekend, and obviously a lot has unfolded in the last 7 days with the Giants having a lot of interest in Stafford. They were used as a bargaining chip. They thought they had a real chance. Stafford was turned around, signed a new contract for less money to stay with the Rams, and everyone was like, why would you go to the Giants? They're not very good, and you just almost made it to the Super Bowl. So I think he made the right decision from his perspective, got the bidding up, got the money he wanted, and left, other teams looking for answers, and the Giants are now pivoting. And I'll say this, the natural process in this is we're going to hear the Giants link to every quarterback because they're trying to cover their tracks now. They're trying to, show interest in Kirk Cousins and Darnold and this guy and that guy, and we're going to trade up, we're going to do this. They're basically now trying to recover themselves and say, well, let's see what happens, and, we're not going to give you any answers. But the one storyline that is emerging as one of the more consistent ones is that they do have interest in Aaron Rodgers. Now, if for those wondering, can Aaron Rodgers speak to the Giants? Absolutely. He's still part of the Jets, and the Jets could give him permission to speak with the Giants about whatever it might be, just as the Giants just did with Stafford. They discussed acquiring him and extending him. The Rams gave them permission, and the Giants spoke to Stafford and his agents. So same exact process could be unfolding with the Jets, whether it be via a trade for nothing. I think the Jets are probably going to cut both Rodgers and Davante Adams, but the Giants can still talk to him if they were given permission by the Jets. Who knows what they discussed? This is an interesting situation where I think Rodgers is one of the better free agents on the board. The projected contract for him, Anthony, is 1 year, $25 million. So you're looking at a guaranteed $25 million. One and done. That's my preference, though. My preference is one and done, bridge quarterback, draft a guy. Specifically in this instance, I want Cam Ward. And I said to you before the podcast started, we just watched Joe Schoen in broad daylight try to save his job by trading for Matthew Stafford. That's what that move was. It was a job-saving shotgun reaction move. Now, if that is how he's planning to operate this year in this offseason, it is in his best interest to go and sign a veteran bridge like a Rodgers and to trade up in the draft and get a quarterback, because it makes it a lot more difficult for John Mara to fire Dable and Shane if they just drafted a rookie quarterback. Because naturally you want to give that guy a little bit more of a leash to help build the team, build the roster, situate. You don't want to turn the whole thing over right after you get your rookie quarterback that you think could be a franchise caliber piece, right? That's not how you want to operate. Joe Schoen knows he has an opportunity to put a little bit more of a difficult piece in place when it comes to Mara making a decision about his future. Having a rookie quarterback that he drafted, you don't really want to fire them and then give that rookie quarterback to a regime that did not draft him, right? Like that's what we saw happen with Daniel Jones, and then they doubled down on him, and obviously whatever unfolded. But it gives Joe Schoen a bargaining chip, and I think that it's in his best interest to trade up and get a quarterback instead of just going BPA, right? That's how I feel about it. If that's what Joe Schoen wants to do to save his job, it is the best alternative at this point in time, which is why we're hearing they are absolutely going to try and trade up. So, I'll get your take on that, Anthony, but then also what you think it will take to get to the first overall pick, because I do have an opinion in mind. I've been kind of hard set on this specific package I think it will take to get to number one. And it's not as much as probably in other draft classes based on the talent available.
Well, let me hear your projected trade package, because I have one in my head, and I imagine they're pretty similar.
So mine is this year's third round pick and next year's second round pick. I think it starts this year's third and next year's third. I think it ends up this year's third and next year's second.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much exactly what I had in line. I think it's going to cost 2/3, maybe a third and a second. I could end up seeing it, if negotiations go a certain way and there are several teams vying for that number one overall pick where it ends up being this year's second and next year's third. I think that's totally a reasonable possibility and outcome depending on the negotiations. But, I mean, frankly, I'm willing to make either one of those deals. Whatever the Giants have to do to make sure that they get their franchise quarterback. Obviously, I've been pretty clear that I feel like Cam Ward is QB1. I've had that as my opinion for a very long time now. Yes, I like Shedeur Sanders a lot. I don't think the gap is that wide between them, but when you're talking about quarterback prospects, any gap is a gap worth considering and worth moving up to go get your guy about. So the expectation is if a team does trade up to the number one overall pick, that is for Cam Ward. Cam Ward was obviously a Heisman Trophy finalist. He had a hell of a season for Miami. I really liked him as a prospect coming out of Washington State last year. He transferred to Miami, got way better and more talented. He put more talent on display on his film this past season and really demonstrated why he should be the number one quarterback in this draft class. And for the New York Giants, who, yeah, they need a short-term solution with a quarterback in free agency, Rodgers being the guy that we're discussing, but they also need to figure out the position long-term. And they need to make sure that they put in a plan in place that allows a quarterback to step in and grow accordingly. Not be rushed in, not be thrown into the fire. Let him sit, let him learn, let him develop, and eventually take over when he's ready on his own time and terms. And that's what I really want to see happen with Cam Ward or whoever the Giants draft in this year's draft at the quarterback position. I want them to make sure that they have a capable bridge quarterback in front of this guy so that he isn't thrown into the fire too soon. And for what it's worth, I'm not the only one who feels that way. In fact, Malik Neighbors is somebody during Super Bowl week when he was speaking with NBC Sports, Alex, he said that he wants the Giants to bring in a veteran because he doesn't want the rookie that they draft to feel like he has to be the savior of the team. That's when you go out there and make mistakes. That's paraphrasing Malik Neighbors, and that's pretty much echoing the same sentiment that you and I have had for several months here when we've discussed the potential for the Giants to add talent both in free agency and in the draft at the quarterback position, which we know that they have to do, and they absolutely will do. So I like your projected trade package. Again, I'm willing to even go a little bit higher than that price tag to make sure that we get our guy. Obviously, it's going to be a controversial decision no matter what the New York Giants do at the quarterback position in the draft. This year's draft class is not last year's draft class. We all know that. The talent level between a Cam Ward versus a Drake May is a lot different. And yeah, it is true that even though Cam Ward is QB1 in this class, he might have been QB5 in last year's class. Even still, the price tag, as you mentioned, is a bit lower this year because of that, and also because of the fact that the Titans, while they might want to trade down, they don't want to trade down too far. They're dead set on drafting either Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter. If they trade down any further than the third overall pick, they will miss out on one of, if not both, of those prospects. So the Giants really do have a perfect situation here to make this trade and convince the Titans to move down and give the Giants the opportunity to pick first overall, which they haven't done in, I believe, 50-something years. So it would be really exciting for the Giants to be picking number one. It would be really exciting because we know that the Giants are getting their quarterback, and that's really the thing here for me, Alex. I want Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll to be able to take their guy. I don't want them to have to sit back, wait, who's there with the number 3 overall pick? Now let's take one of these quarterbacks, whichever one fell to us. No, I want there to be no questions. I don't want there to be any doubts that the Giants got the guy that they like the best, and I think that John Mara should feel the same way. John Mara should be saying, you guys, I want zero excuses. Go get your quarterback. That way, by the end of the year, we know that this was your doing. This is who you liked the best, and we're going to let you ride based on the selection that you made at quarterback. And so that's what I want to see the New York Giants do. Go get your guy. Be aggressive. I always say it, Alex. I'd rather you be proactive than reactive. Feel as though the Giants have been very reactive in a lot of their moves over the last few years. Be proactive here. Go get the quarterback that you like the best. And yes, pay the small premium that you have to pay in order to make that happen. But I really think it's necessary for Joe Schoen to plant his flag and say, this was my QB1 in this class. This is the guy that I wanted, and this is the guy that I got.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that is exactly what Joe Schoen is going to have to do and what he's needs to do to really put himself in a position to even remotely protect his job security. having a guy like Rodgers, and I like Rodgers for a couple reasons, like outside of the, kind of off the field stuff that he does, purely on the field, the players on the Jets like Rodgers. They've said nothing but good things about him in terms of, how they were treated. Now, Rodgers isn't known for his mentorship, right? But I don't really care about mentorship, right? I care about learning the offense, being prepared, and Ward watching Rodgers. He's a professional, right? He's been doing this for a very long time. He has a process that helps him prepare, whether it's watching film, whether it's, taking care of his body, whatever it might be. I think that Ward specifically said one of the quarterbacks he looks up to is Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers said specifically about Malik Neighbors, this guy is a star, right? So, like, there's a lot of things, like, there's admiration on both sides. Ward for Rodgers and Rodgers for Neighbors. So, not to mention Neighbors says he watches, Devonte Adams as well. So, a lot of, like, connections here that don't mean anything, but are, like, respected. The players respect each other. I think that Ward watching Rodgers is cool because Rodgers historically, some of the best pocket presence, we've seen, future Hall of Famer. We're talking about a guy that has undeniable arm talent, flick of a wrist can put a ball in a window that didn't exist, anticipatory throwing, whatever it might be. A guy that, has regressed. Yes, absolutely. But the mental attributes are still there. Yeah, his arm probably is not as good as it once was. But I think that Ward can learn a lot about, especially with his arm style, his throwing style. Rodgers is capable of throwing over, side, like all those different arm slots, right? He does it all the time on the sidearm throws. Like, I think Ward could learn a lot about how to have better footwork, because that's one of the big knocks on Ward is that his footwork is sometimes inconsistent. I know, Anthony, you like his torque a lot from his hips. That's where he generates a lot of power. But his footwork sometimes is a little bit lazy. I think that Rodgers' footwork is, you're looking at a guy that's been working for a decade at this. And I think that he could learn a thing or two from that. Not talking about mentorship. I'm talking about just watching this guy, how he operates in the pocket, how he uses his feet, how his eyes scan the field, how his reactions, how his, his discipline, kind of translate to an in-game performance. I think these things are important. And a guy like Ward could benefit. And, Rodgers isn't the only piece here. Obviously you have Russell Wilson, you have other veterans that do have that type of caliber, but I do think Rodgers, from a standpoint of being a quarterback, is probably better than Russ. Russ obviously was very mobile in his career. Rodgers had some mobility, but relied a lot more on his arm and pocket presence and ability to extend plays behind the pocket or behind the line of scrimmage. So these things I do believe favor Ward in a little bit in terms of, like, the style that Rodgers plays. I don't know how you feel about that. Just, like, kind of not mentorship, but Cam being able to sit behind a player like this and watch and learn the cadences of the offense, and a player that has some similarities to him.
Yeah, like I said, I think it takes a lot of pressure off Cam Ward's shoulders, or whichever quarterback, but we'll assume in this conversation that it is Cam Ward, since, we're talking about the scenario of trading up for a quarterback and signing Rodgers. I think it takes a lot of pressure off his shoulders, and you're right. I mean, you are watching one of the all-time greats play in front of you. That definitely helped Eli Manning when he was playing behind Kurt Warner, and I'm not saying that Kurt Warner's not even the caliber of player that Aaron Rodgers ever was, but Kurt Warner was still a very good, solid pro who had won a Super Bowl in the past, and Eli Manning got to watch the way that he prepared and got ready for every single game and practice and all of that, and then eventually when they turned to Eli and he took over, I have to imagine that watching Kurt Warner practice and play every single day helped him make that transition a little bit easier, and that's just one example, and that's the one that sticks out in my mind because I'm a Giants fan. But there are so many examples that you can turn to that you can find and say, hey, this was a situation where a rookie sat for a while, watched a great quarterback play, learned from that, and benefited in the long run. And I really do like what you said, Alex, about the potential overlap in their playing styles, because I don't really view Cam Ward as a dual threat, highly mobile quarterback. Yes, he can move. He extends plays very well, but he's not exactly a weapon with his legs. He's not somebody that you expect to game plan about his ability to run and his ability to score touchdowns and rip big runs with his legs, right? But you do expect him to be able to extend those plays. And that's what Rodgers did. Rodgers at no point in his career was ever going to rush for 100 yards in a game and rip 30-yard touchdown runs, but he was going to extend plays behind the line of scrimmage with his legs. And I think that there's a lot that you can learn from a player like that as Cam Ward, since your playing style is so similar. In fact, I think that his mobility and athleticism is kind of akin to what Aaron Rodgers was back in his heyday with the Green Bay Packers. So there is a lot of overlap in that regard, in my opinion. I do agree with you there, Alex. And I think the selling point for me with Aaron Rodgers, Alex, and, this is similar to the conversation that we just had about Matthew Stafford. Of course, everybody who has been keeping along with our coverage of the Stafford situation knows that initially we both were anti-Stafford trade, or really didn't want to see it come to fruition. By the end of it, I actually had an open mind to it, and in fact, came around and came in support of it. The reason being, my take is this. A lot of people say that the worst place you could be in the NFL is the middle. And I absolutely objectively disagree with that. I think that you need to be good before you can be great. And I used several examples when I made this argument, Alex. As you know, the Ravens were good, then they plugged in Lamar Jackson. Now they're great. The Bills were good, went to a playoff game, then they plugged in Josh Allen, then they were great. The Chiefs were the prime example. They were good every year, making the playoffs, couldn't get past the wild card round, plugged in Patrick Mahomes. Now they're great. They won Super Bowls. Even the Philadelphia Eagles were good, but they didn't have enough. Then they plugged in a few pieces, Jalen Hurts included. Now they're Super Bowl champions. So my take has been evolving here, and now it is that the fact of the matter is that the Giants are so bad that any rookie quarterback that just gets plugged into this mess is probably going to be left on an island to fail. Now what I think the Giants need to do is shift focus, become good, then plug that rookie in and become great. And while I might not be the biggest Aaron Rodgers fan, while I don't think that he's a top 10 quarterback in the NFL at this point in his career, he does help the Giants become good again. Now, I'm not saying that they are going to be great. I'm not saying that they're going to be playoff contenders, but they're probably not going to be picking top 5 if they sign Aaron Rodgers and Devonte Adams, in my opinion. They'd be picking closer to the 10 to 20 range than they would to the 0 to 5 range, or 1 to 5 range. So, for me, the selling point to signing Aaron Rodgers is that the Giants could become good, continue to build the roster, then eventually follow that Chiefs, Bills, Ravens, Eagles model, plug that rookie quarterback in, and that's the next piece of the puzzle that makes them great. If you sign Rodgers and you sign Adams and you continue to build out the rest of the roster without feeling so much pressure to die for your quarterback in the draft, you can make some more calculated decisions to improve the roster top to bottom on both sides of the ball, so that way when that rookie does step in, they're not fighting on their own. They don't have nothing surrounding them in terms of talent. It's not just them versus the world like we saw with Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers didn't have a plan at quarterback. They didn't have a solid bridge. They didn't build up that roster effectively enough to make it a situation and an environment that could nurture Bryce Young's talent. So therefore, he was fighting on his own. He was struggling. He was rushing. He was taking hits. He needed to be benched. He came back after that, after they finally gave him a bridge with Andy Dalton, and then he came back into the lineup and started playing better. Sometimes that's really necessary for a young quarterback, and that's exactly my point here with the New York Giants. If you sign Aaron Rodgers, you become a better football team immediately. You don't become playoff contenders immediately, but you get a lot closer to becoming a good team than you are right now with no quarterbacks on the roster, and if you run it back with Drew Lock or somebody of equivalent talent. The Giants need to become good and then plug a Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders in there, whoever it is. That might be the piece that makes them great. So I flipped. Initially, again, Alex, I wasn't in favor of signing Rodgers, but again, after thinking about it further, I really feel as though the Giants need to at least just aim to be good. They're not going to become Super Bowl contenders overnight. That much we can pretty much write off as a guarantee. Shane shouldn't be trying to become a Super Bowl contender overnight. He should be trying to build this roster to get good again, then plug the rookie in. Hopefully that elevates them and makes them great. That's what I want to see the Giants do, and that's why I think Aaron Rodgers truly does make sense for them if their goal is to become a good, middle-of-the-pack team and then plug the rookie in and try and become a top team in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, that makes the most sense logically because you look at the schedule next year, the NFC East, and it's a gauntlet. It's going to be really tough for the Giants with Stafford, without Stafford, with Rodgers, without Rodgers. No matter who the hell's playing quarterback for this team, they're going to be, they're going to have their backs against the wall. They're going to be fighting for their life a lot of these times. So Joe Shane, like that, he knows these things though, right? Like that's why he went after Stafford because the outlook for this team next year with this schedule is very, very ugly. And I think Joe is like, I got to win at least 7 games to like keep my job or at least show progress. Can Rodgers do that for you? And here's the next, kind of page in that sequence is Davante Adams, right? The Giants want they probably not want, but need another top tier receiver to support Neighbors. They cannot feed Neighbors the way they did last season and expect him to stay healthy. It's not going to happen. He got hurt multiple times, multiple concussions. They overfed Neighbors, and that is a thing. And Anthony, you said it while the season was unfolding. It is an unsustainable pace of which he was being targeted. The hits that he was taking, the types of catches, everything about how they were using Neighbors was unsustainable. So they need another top-tier receiver, and if they get Rodgers, the natural assumption is that Davante Adams follows him to the Giants. Now, people will say, Rodgers will ignore Neighbors, and he'll only target Adams. I don't think that's true, right? Garrett Wilson still was putting up good numbers last year, and it took a lot of pressure off. Obviously, he could have done more. I think that he was underutilized in a lot of instances, but I'm not trying to kill Neighbors, right? I want him to thrive in an environment where the pressure is spread out, where the pressure is not entirely on him. Just like how the Eagles, they spread out all of their reps. AJ Brown was kind of upset that he wasn't getting all the reps. They won a Super Bowl. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how. And I think the top receivers, they need support too, because it's unsustainable to be that heavily targeted. And I think that Adams is a fine enough player, and he'll get enough targets that it won't kill Neighbors in the long run.
Yeah, I'm. You might have had more to say, but I do want to jump in and just say this, because I think that what happened with Garrett Wilson and the Jets last year was almost embarrassing. They really phased him out of a lot of games. Like, you're saying that he was underutilized. It really wasn't even that. Like, he was taken out of certain game plans, and it was inexplicable. And oftentimes he was in the game plan and he was open, and Rodgers would not throw him the ball, and that was problematic. And that's really what Jets fans are fearing here. But I do think that fear needs to be settled down. I think that you have to understand the context of everything here. The Jets were just a mess fundamentally last season. The Giants were too. But if they do go ahead and they sign Adams and Rodgers, the expectation needs to be that Adams is going to be the number 2 receiver. He's not going to be the primary target man. That's going to be the expectation. And you know what? It should be, and it probably will be, because Rodgers loves Malik Neighbors, wants to throw the ball to Malik Neighbors, had great conversations with him during training camp last year during those joint practices. He admires Malik Neighbors. He's going to want to feed him the ball, and more weapons the better. And exactly what you said there with the Eagles, Alex, is what I was going to say. Yeah, it was a problem last year for the Jets when Adams was getting the ball and Wilson wasn't, because they were a bad football team. Winning heals all of that stuff, right? If they're winning, I don't think Malik Neighbors is going to care at all. Like, I've seen Giants fans say exactly what you're talking about. Oh, I don't want Neighbors to get frustrated with his role next year and request a trade, and then he's playing for the Commanders in 2026. It's not going to happen if the Giants win football games. That's what Malik Neighbors cares about more than anything. The guy is an ultimate competitor, but he is not a selfish player, in my opinion. I think that he just wants to win football games, and he wants to get that job done however necessary. Whether that's Rodgers throwing the ball to Adams, sharing it with him, whatever it is, Malik Neighbors just wants to win football games. AJ Brown just wanted to win football games, and he feels that he gives the team the best chance of winning those games. Ultimately, even though that ball was getting spread around in Philadelphia, he came up big when it mattered most. He caught a touchdown pass in the Super Bowl, and the Eagles ended up hoisting a trophy. As sickening as that reality might be, that is the reality. And that's what the New York Giants need to strive for. If you win games, you have to understand all of these other storylines and points of contention, they go out the window, because these guys are competitors at the end of the day. Yes, they care about their contracts. Yes, they care about their stats, but they also care about their wins. And oftentimes, your wins are what get you paid. The Giants didn't pay Saquon Barkley because they weren't winning games with Saquon Barkley. He went elsewhere, got paid in a team that he could win with. That's what the Giants need to do. If Neighbors is winning football games, it will ultimately help him in the long run. He will understand that, and that needs to be the mission, and bringing in more talent to the wide receiver position works. And I also, last closing point on the Neighbors and Adams thing here, Alex, yeah, some fans might look at what happened with the Jets last year and be afraid, but some fans might also look at the Cincinnati Bengals and their elite wide receiver duo and be excited. There's two ways that it can go, and it's going to depend on many different factors, but I don't know how we could be upset as Giants fans to have true potential number 1 wide receivers on the same roster. That's exciting. That makes you a better football team. That helps your running game as well. Less pressure on Tyrone Tracy Jr., less stacked boxes that he's going to face as a result of teams needing to compete and cover both Neighbors, Adams, and even Wan'Dale Robinson's a good receiver too. So I think the more talent you add to the receiving core, the better. If the Giants are bringing in Aaron Rodgers, absolutely bring in Davante Adams, and don't worry about the other stuff, because they're all pros, they're all good players, And Neighbors is just here to win football games. And as long as the Giants start winning some more games, which I believe they will win more games than they did last year, if they bring in Aaron Rodgers, Neighbors will be happy, and so will we as Giants fans.
Absolutely. And it's only 1 year, guys. It's not like you're bringing in these guys for a long-term situation. Maybe Adam stays beyond a season. But it's 1 year for Neighbors to get some support. And I don't think that, because it was kind of an anomaly last year where, they acquire Adams. And to be quite honest with you, I think that's kind of where the Jets were going with it. They were like, our offense is not working and we need a jolt. And Adams came in and they're like, we didn't just acquire him to sit around and give up targets to Wilson. We're going to hyper focus on him because we know Rodgers and that connection is legitimate, and that they will be able to produce. And they did produce a good amount towards the end of the season. So, I think that was just a strategy for the Jets. And like you said, it was the game plan for the Jets. They phased Wilson out for whatever reason. And Wilson was upset, right? Like Wilson was definitely not happy with it. But Neighbors, I think, is gonna get his fair share because the guy is open all the time, and he can do stuff with the ball after the catch, and he is obviously dangerous just on short concepts, what he can do. So, not to say that Wilson isn't, but I think Neighbors, obviously, it's a fresh start for a guy like Rodgers with a new team and whatever it might be. I'm not going to use that as an example for why we shouldn't get Rodgers. He is a the truth of the matter is that 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers, Anthony, is the best quarterback we've had in like a decade. You know what I mean? That's the reality. And yeah, it's kind of unfortunate because it's true, but this is where we are. And I think that, maybe not a decade. Eli had some decent years towards the end, but, whatever, last 6, 7, 8 years. I do think that he will give you substantial improvement. And, this guy, and I know a lot of this was in garbage time, 28 touchdowns last year, so I'm not going to use it as without the context included. But with an offense that Brian Daboll wants to run, Rodgers can throw 30 touchdowns for this team. Rodgers can do that type of stuff for you. And the Giants, can reinforce their offensive line at the same time. Now, let's talk about that contract, what it would look like for a second. 1 year, $25 million is the projected deal. The Giants have about $40 million after the draft, maybe about $32 million to spend. You're probably looking at a deal that's like, it's a 1 year, $25 million deal, but $10 million of it is counting against the cap in 2025, and then the extra $15 million is probably built in as there's dead money in 2026 where you're just gonna have to deal with it and eat the money. Daniel Jones is still on the books for $20 million. You're gonna have to pay Rodgers, a little bit more in 2026 because of it. How do you feel about that? Like creating a little bit of dead money. They have so much cap space next year. It's like a drop in the bucket. It doesn't even matter because they can always backload some money, worst case, to make up for it. Whether they sign a couple of guys, they can just take a little sliver of that and equate to $15 million in 2027. Easy to maneuver around. How do you think they would go about it, though, in terms of structuring a deal like that?
A deal with Rodgers being a 2-year deal, I think it's difficult to say.
Like a 1 year deal. Like a one-year deal, $25 million. But how would you structure it so, you probably aren't going to take the full $25 million on this year because you need some money to spend. So maybe you kick $15 million into 2026.
Yeah, it would come down to void years is what the Giants would probably have to do, is attach void years to that contract where they can just throw that money around, or you do make it a 2-year deal with an out after one, and you just acknowledge the fact that you're probably going to pay him to not be on your team next year. That's also a possibility, and I know fans usually don't like that, but with the elevating salary cap every single year, well, if the Giants have $20 million in dead cap next year for Rodgers, it's pretty much going to be null and void because the cap is going to go up by $20 million. So you're pretty much essentially factoring in your mind, next year I'm expecting the cap to go up this much, so therefore I'm going to not be able to reap the benefits of that because I'm already going to apply that boost to Aaron Rodgers, and that's essentially how you can look at it. That's one of two ways. Again, the void years are the other way, and if you want, you can attach Alex 5 years to the void, 5 void years to Aaron Rodgers' contract. Just keep paying that money out over several years while you know that he's not on the team. And again, the adjustment to inflation with the salary cap is going to make that money null and void anyway. So that's one of the ways that I would do it. I'm also open-minded to the idea of signing Rodgers to that 2-year contract, and hopefully if he does play well enough, you just keep him playing and you keep a building around him, or for any quarterback. I don't think that you necessarily need to pigeonhole it as it's only 1 year and then we're absolutely moving on. Rodgers is part of two of the most famous situations with long-term quarterback succession plans. First of all, he was behind Brett Favre for however long and then eventually took over 3 or 4 years later. And then the same thing happened with Jordan Love. So if you want to have a situation where the quarterback takes their time and then takes over, well, you don't necessarily want to rush your bridge out of the building. If you sign Rodgers, you don't want to say that it's only 1 year and there's no negotiation to that. Maybe it is a 2-year deal. Maybe you do take your time fully with Cam Ward and then eventually get him integrated into your offense. So I think that's a possibility as well. But the salary cap is going to be funny to talk about because you're right, Alex. It's going to look like a drop in the bucket in 2026, potentially, because the Giants have so much cap space next year. However, they have a lot of cap space next year, but I think a lot of that is going to be used up this offseason. And what I mean by that is the Giants have a solid amount of cap space this offseason, $48 million. That's a good amount. You can get a lot of contracts done there. But I think because of the way that things are looking for the Giants, like you said, desperate, making win-now moves, trying to save jobs, I think they're actually going to restructure a lot of contracts that maybe they shouldn't, free up more cap space this offseason, and start backloading a lot of deals. I think they're really trying to get back to winning games now, and that win-now mindset is going to prompt Joe Shane to make some salary adjustments, free up some more cap space this offseason to spend big. We know that they have an interest in guys like Will Fries on the offensive line from the Colts at right guard. They've got an interest in guys like DJ Reed in the cornerback market from the New York Jets. And they've got an interest in guys like Devonte Adams, like Aaron Rodgers. If the Giants are going to express all of this interest in all of these players, and if they really plan on bringing all of these guys in, they're going to need more than $48 million to spend, especially considering the fact that they still need to add depth and get their roster up to 90 men. So they're going to spend a lot of money this offseason, and that is ultimately going to sacrifice money in the 2026 and 27 offseasons as they restructure contracts, backload deals, and just get creative with the cap in order to build the best roster possible for this offseason. So while I get your perspective on it, and you're saying that money thrown into 2026 will be dropping the bucket because the Giants, I believe they have projected 170 million or something to spend next year. I think that number is going to dwindle pretty quickly because I think the Giants are going to make a lot of moves to free up cap space this offseason at the expense of the subsequent offseasons.
Yeah, most likely. That's kind of what they're going to have to do. But you know what? This kind of situation the Giants are in right now is interesting. I think the natural progression here is going to be Rodgers trading up for Cam Ward. It's going to possibly be bringing in Davante Adams as well. That gives you a much better offense than you've had recently and a natural transition to a rookie quarterback. I think that's a pretty good plan. I know, like, I'm ignoring all the outside stuff about Rodgers, you know, the ayahuasca and his Egyptian journeys and whatever, but, like, the truth is like, he's not a long-term player here, guys. You know what I mean? He is a short-term bridge quarterback. That is what we are paying him to be. We're not paying him to win us a Super Bowl. We're not paying him for for success that the Jets thought he would bring them. We are paying him for one reason and one reason only, to help transition a young player, and he's not a distraction on the football field. I know I don't think he's going to have the power to bring in Nathaniel Hackett and replace Brian Daboll's play caller, because Daboll's the head coach and he calls plays. So, like, it's not going to happen, right? It's not going to happen. If anything, Adams follows him, and I think that might be the only condition that Rodgers has, and I'm fine with that condition. I'm fine with that because he's a legitimate WR2 at this point in his career, a good one, and we need that right now. So I do think that's possible, but we'll have to see how things continue to unfold in this regard. But it's certainly like not something I'm opposed to. Like a couple of weeks ago, I'd been like, yeah, absolutely not, because there were better options available, and the Giants were like not going to be drafted. We weren't sure if they were going to be able to get a quarterback, but a lot of context is now formulated and changed. So I do feel as though this is a pretty solid option for the Giants. We've also heard that people believe, I think Connor Hughes reported that people believe that Russ will end up being a Giant, so we just don't know what's going to happen at this point. I'm also fine with Russ depending on the price tag, so we'll have to see how things materialize on that front. There's a lot of action still to happen. When free agency starts, it's going to start to, I think the Giants will be pretty fast to get a quarterback, Anthony. It's going to happen pretty fast for them because they don't want to happen what happened last year where they waited too long and then ended up with Drew Lock as their backup quarterback. They're going to be first come, first serve for the Giants in free agency when it comes to this position. So we'll see them make a move pretty quickly, and I think it'll definitely set up the draft and how they hope things will unfold. But you look at the Titans right now; they're doing meetings with all the top players, like in the next coming days, whether it's Sanders, Carter, Hunter, Ward. They're getting all this eval done right now, so that way they can make a decision on what they want to do with the number 1 overall pick. So Lots to happen in Giants land, and there's some really exciting players we want to talk about in the coming days regarding the draft. Really, really good offensive line class in the second, third rounds. Really good defensive tackle class. Some really good receivers that we like a lot. There's a lot of stuff happening where I think the Giants could walk away in the second round and just go BPA and naturally solve one of their needs, just because they have so many. We need a guard. We could use a tackle, we could use a corner, we could use a receiver. Like if you don't want to go receiver, you can go with a different position. There's going to be a lot. Any BPA option in the second round probably solves the need for us at this point. So I think that's the goal. Trade up for Ward, everything else, best player available. And I think that's probably what they end up doing because they need help everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. They need help all over the place. So going BPA is, of course, going to be the move, in my opinion, for the Giants, as I've expressed so many times. Closing notes here, though, Alex. The legal tampering period is 1 week from today. So within the next 7 days, we'll know who the Giants' bridge quarterback is. Because like you said, it's going to happen early. The Giants are going to get that deal done as soon as the legal tampering period opens up. So I believe next Monday we'll know who the Giants' week 1 starting quarterback is. And also, I wouldn't discount the idea of the Giants potentially going BPA at number 3 overall. Yes, of course, we're talking about this like we believe the Giants are going to trade up for number 1 and take Cam Ward. I still believe that is very likely to happen. But if you read the reports from Connor Hughes that you just mentioned, Alex, the Giants were planning on going BPA at 3 if they landed Matthew Stafford. So there is a possible outcome here where the Titans don't want to trade down from number 1. The Giants are stuck with the number 3 pick, and they decide, you know what, instead of taking a quarterback, we already got ourselves a capable bridge. Let's just keep building out the roster. And again, that helps you achieve the goal of becoming good before becoming great. And maybe you turn to the 2026 class to plug in a quarterback. That's totally possible. So there's a many possible outcomes that could unfold for the New York Giants. And over these next 7 days leading into that legal tampering period, we're going to try and cover as many of them as possible and get your in-depth analysis from the New York Giants right here on Fireside Giants. So it's going to be a really fun week, and it's going to be a really fun couple months now leading into that NFL draft. But this next week in particular, Alex, we're really excited. It's going to be so much fun breaking down all the different free agent targets and possibilities. Yes, we talked primarily about Aaron Rodgers today. Well, I also read a report that Sam Darnold is open to returning to New York. Didn't say which team. Could be the Jets. Maybe a reunion can unfold here. Also could be the New York Giants. Of course, the Giants also interested in reaching back out to Russell Wilson. So a lot of possibilities here. We're going to break them all down in the coming days. So make sure you leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you listen to Apple or Spotify, make sure you leave us a 5-star review, and go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, catch you on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.
Perfect.